Last year, a passenger on a transatlantic flight noticed something peculiar. The flight attendant who'd been cheerfully serving drinks suddenly walked past her colleague and said very clearly, "We have a code Bravo in 23C. The other attendant's expression didn't change. She just nodded and kept smiling at passengers. No announcement was made, no one panicked. But within 2 minutes, 3 crew members had quietly repositioned themselves near row 23, and the captain had been notified of a potential security threat. The passenger who noticed this exchange later discovered she'd witnessed an entire emergency communication system most travelers never realize exists. While you're watching movies and ordering ginger ale at 30,000 feet, the crew around you is speaking a second language, one designed specifically to keep you calm while they handle everything from medical emergencies to security threats to equipment failures. Here's what makes this fascinating. Airlines can't afford panic. A single passenger freaking out at altitude can trigger a cascade of anxiety that turns a manageable situation into chaos. So they've developed something remarkably clever: a verbal coding system that allows crew members to communicate critical information in plain sight without alarming anyone. These aren't random words or complicated jargon. They're carefully chosen phrases and codes that sound innocuous to untrained ears, but convey precise, urgent information to crew members. Some codes are standardized across the industry. Others are airline-specific. But they all serve the same purpose: turning flight attendants into a coordinated emergency response team that operates in complete silence as far as passengers are concerned. The system works because of how our brains process information. When you hear medical emergency or security threat, your body floods with adrenaline. Your fight or flight response kicks in. But when you hear all call or Mr. Skyborne, your brain files it away as background noise, airline terminology that doesn't concern you. The genius lies in that gap between what's being said and what passengers perceive. Flight attendants are trained from their first day to use these codes reflexively, the same way you'd use someone's name. It becomes second nature. And that matters enormously when seconds count and clarity saves lives. Let's start with the most common code you'll hear, though you've probably never recognized it as such. All call typically happens right before takeoff. The lead flight attendant will say something like, "Doors to arrival and cross-check, all call." To passengers, this sounds like standard procedure language, maybe something about door positions. What's actually happening is a verification system. Each flight attendant is confirming their door is properly armed or disarmed depending on the phase of flight, and the all call means everyone must check in verbally over the intercom. If someone doesn't respond, the crew immediately knows there's a problem, whether it's a stuck door, an injured crew member, or a communication system failure. This happens on virtually every commercial flight you've ever taken, usually while you're settling into your seat and stuffing bags into overhead bins. The code is hiding in plain sight. Then there's Operation Rising, a term that makes it sound like some corporate initiative, but actually signals something far more serious. This code indicates the crew has identified a potential human trafficking situation on board. Flight attendants are trained to spot certain patterns. An adult traveling with children who seem fearful or unable to answer basic questions. Passengers who won't make eye contact. Someone who appears sedated or controlled by their companion. When a flight attendant suspects trafficking, they can't exactly announce it. The perpetrator is sitting right there. Instead, they use Operation Rising, or similar airline-specific codes, to alert the rest of the crew and the cockpit. The captain then contacts authorities on the ground, and law enforcement meets the aircraft upon arrival. The suspected victim never knows help was summoned. Neither does the trafficker, until the plane doors open and officers are waiting. Medical emergencies get their own elaborate coding system because they're remarkably common. On any given flight with 300 passengers, the statistical likelihood of someone experiencing a medical issue significant enough to require crew intervention is higher than most people think. heart attacks, seizures, diabetic emergencies, allergic reactions, strokes, even women going into premature labor. All of these happen thousands of feet in the air with greater frequency than airlines publicize. So crews use codes like Code Red or Mr. Fisher or We Need Assistance in the cabin to signal medical help is required. Some airlines skip codes entirely for medical issues and use the PA system to ask if there's a doctor on board, but others prefer to handle it more discreetly, especially if the passenger is conscious and embarrassed. The beautiful complexity comes in how much information can be packed into these simple phrases. Code Yellow on many airlines means a medical emergency requiring immediate attention but not life-threatening. Code Blue escalates it to cardiac arrest or respiratory failure. Code Black can mean a bomb threat. Code Green sometimes signals a general emergency that doesn't fit other categories. But here's where it gets tricky. These codes aren't universal. American Airlines might use completely different terminology than Delta or United or international carriers. A code that means medical emergency on one airline could mean something entirely different on another. This is why flight attendants go through airline-specific training even if they've worked for competitors before. The vocabulary changes. Now obviously, when you're dealing with actual emergencies, crews can't waste time being subtle about everything. If there's a fire, everyone's going to know about it quickly. Same with severe turbulence or rapid decompression. But even then, the language remains controlled. Flight attendants will use phrases like brace, brace, brace in crash scenarios rather than screaming or panicking. They'll shout, stay down, if someone's trying to stand during violent turbulence. These aren't codes exactly, but they're carefully chosen words that command without triggering hysteria. The goal is always directed action rather than fear-based reaction. Tell people exactly what to do, not what's going wrong. Security threats represent perhaps the most sensitive category of codes. If a passenger becomes aggressive or violent, crews need to communicate the threat level without escalating the situation. An agitated person who overhears, "We have a violent passenger in row 15, might become more violent. But "We have a level 2 in the rear cabin," communicates the same information to crew without inflaming anything. Different airlines use different terminologies. Some use color codes, some use numbers, some use seemingly innocuous names. Mr. Skyborne has been used by some airlines to indicate an unruly passenger. Philip was reportedly used as code for a potential hijacker on some carriers, though post-9/11 security measures have largely replaced these older systems with more standardized protocols. There's a particularly chilling code that fortunately gets used rarely: signals for a hijacking in progress. Post-September 11th, procedures changed dramatically. Cockpit doors were reinforced. Communication protocols were redesigned. But flight attendants still need ways to alert the cockpit if someone's attempting to breach the flight deck or has threatened the aircraft. Some airlines trained crews to use specific drink orders over the intercom. 2 coffees to the flight deck might mean everything's fine. 3 coffees to the flight deck could mean there's a threat. Others use passenger service requests as signals. The codes vary, but the principle remains. Give pilots information while maintaining the element of surprise against potential hijackers. Think about the psychological weight flight attendants carry with this knowledge. They're trained to smile, serve drinks, demonstrate safety equipment, and keep passengers comfortable. But they're also trained as first responders, security personnel, and emergency coordinators. They need to assess every passenger boarding the plane as both a customer and a potential threat. They watch for suspicious behavior, medical distress, intoxication, fear of flying that might become disruptive. And they process all of this while maintaining an appearance of calm, friendly service. The codes they use are tools that let them do 2 jobs simultaneously: hospitality worker and safety officer. Here's something most passengers never consider. Flight attendants don't just use these codes during obvious emergencies. They use them constantly for minor situations you'd never classify as emergencies, but that still require crew coordination. A passenger who's had too much to drink before boarding. Someone who keeps trying to use the bathroom during final approach when seatbelt signs are on. A child traveling alone who seems distressed. A passenger who keeps standing up during turbulence despite repeated warnings. All of these scenarios have associated codes or phrases that let the crew communicate and coordinate responses without making announcements that might embarrass passengers or create unnecessary tension. The training for all this is extensive. New flight attendants spend weeks learning not just safety procedures, but communication protocols. They practice using codes in simulated emergencies until it becomes automatic. They learn to read passengers, identify potential problems before they escalate, and communicate with each other through a combination of codes, hand signals, and sometimes just meaningful looks. Senior flight attendants can coordinate an entire cabin response to an emergency with minimal verbal communication using codes and gestures the passengers never consciously notice. Hand signals deserve their own examination here because they're part of the same silent communication network. During critical phases of flight, during emergencies, or in loud cabin environments, flight attendants use standardized hand signals that complement the verbal codes. A closed fist might mean sit down. An open palm means stay there. Specific finger configurations can indicate different types of emergencies or requests for assistance. These aren't random gestures. They're as carefully designed as the verbal codes, taught in training, and practiced until they're instinctive. When you see flight attendants making hand signals to each other across the cabin, they're not waving hello. They're communicating operational information. The codes extend beyond emergencies into operational communications that improve efficiency and safety during normal operations. Jump seat available tells crew members they can take a break. Galley secure confirms a specific section is ready for takeoff or landing. Crosscheck complete verifies that door arms and disarms have been confirmed. These might sound mundane, but they're part of the same language system. Every phrase serves a purpose. Nothing is casual communication when you're responsible for hundreds of lives in a metal tube traveling at 500 miles per hour. International flights add another layer of complexity. Crews from different countries working together on code-share flights or international routes need to understand each other's systems. Many international airlines have adopted standardized codes for major emergencies, but regional variations still exist. A flight attendant trained in Japan might use different terminology than one trained in Germany or Brazil. This is why major international airlines increasingly emphasize English proficiency and standardized emergency vocabulary during their hiring and training processes. The last thing you want during a crisis is confusion, because crew members literally don't speak the same language. There have been moments in aviation history where this coding system proved essential. During the attempted shoe bombing by Richard Reed in December 2001, flight attendants used coded communications to alert the cockpit and coordinate passenger assistance in subduing Reed without triggering a wider panic that might have helped him complete his attack. During medical emergencies at altitude where passengers with medical training assisted, crews used codes to communicate the severity of situations and coordinate supplies and assistance without broadcasting frightening details to the entire cabin. In instances of severe turbulence where passengers and crew were injured, coded communications helped coordinate emergency responses while keeping passengers informed without terrifying them about the severity of damage or injuries. What's particularly interesting is how this system has evolved with technology. Modern aircraft have sophisticated crew communication systems. Flight attendants can send text messages to the cockpit on screens that passengers never see. They can activate silent emergency signals with hidden buttons positioned throughout the cabin. The verbal codes remain important, especially for crew-to-crew communication and in situations where electronic systems might be compromised, but They're now part of a larger technological network. A flight attendant can press a button that alerts the cockpit to a security threat while simultaneously using verbal codes to position other crew members, creating redundant communication channels that increase the likelihood crucial information gets through. Airlines regularly update their code systems too. Security threats evolve. New types of medical emergencies emerge. Regulations change. Every few years, crews receive refresher training that might include updated codes or modified protocols. This isn't static knowledge they learn once and forget. It's living operational language that adapts to new realities. After COVID-19, for instance, many airlines added specific codes and protocols for handling passengers who refused to wear masks or became ill with respiratory symptoms during flights. The code language expanded to accommodate new threats. Consider the ethics involved in all this secrecy. Airlines are essentially running covert operations right in front of passengers. They're identifying threats, handling emergencies, and making decisions that affect everyone on board, often without informing the passengers what's actually happening. This isn't deception for its own sake. It's calculated decision-making based on decades of experience, showing that informed passengers sometimes means panicked passengers. The codes allow for what psychologists call protective buffering, where those in authority shield others from stressful information while handling the problem. It works when done correctly, but it requires enormous trust in the crew's judgment. That trust isn't misplaced. Flight attendants undergo more safety and emergency training than most people realize. They're certified in CPR, first aid, firefighting, emergency evacuations, water survival, self-defense, and crisis management. They train in simulators where they practice evacuating aircraft filled with smoke. They practice opening emergency exits in complete darkness. They learn to handle everything from delivering babies to restraining violent passengers to administering emergency oxygen. The codes they use are just one tool in an extensive emergency preparedness system designed to protect hundreds of millions of passengers every year. The next time you're on a flight and you hear flight attendants using terminology that sounds official but vague, pay attention. You might be hearing these codes in action. That cheerful announcement about cross-checking isn't random procedure talk. Those attendants making eye contact across the cabin and nodding aren't just being friendly. That seemingly casual conversation between crew members in the galley might be a coded exchange about a passenger who's had too much to drink or a mechanical issue they've noticed. The entire flight is choreographed, and most of what's happening operationally is invisible to passengers by design. This invisible coordination extends to every phase of flight. During boarding, crews are assessing every passenger, identifying people who might need extra assistance during evacuations, spotting potential security concerns, noting passengers who seem nervous or ill. During flight, they're monitoring constantly who's moving around too much, who seems distressed, whether turbulence is affecting passengers, if anyone appears to be having a medical issue. During descent and landing, they're preparing for the statistically most dangerous phases of flight, positioning themselves strategically, ensuring the cabin is secure. And throughout all of this, they're using their coded language to coordinate without you ever knowing anything's happening. What emerges from understanding this system is a profound appreciation for the professionalism involved in commercial aviation. Every single flight is a carefully managed operation where dozens of people are communicating constantly using multiple languages, literal and coded, to ensure safety. The flight attendants aren't just there to serve drinks, though they do that too. They're trained safety professionals operating a sophisticated emergency management system that most passengers never see. Their smiles are genuine, but they're also part of the job. Keep passengers calm, maintain control, handle problems quietly, use the codes when necessary, make it look easy. The codes themselves are just words, simple phrases, names, numbers, colors. But they represent something larger. a recognition that managing human psychology during emergencies matters as much as handling the emergency itself. A panicked airplane is infinitely more dangerous than a calm one, even when facing the same problem, so airlines developed this elegant solution. Let the crew communicate everything they need to communicate, but do it in a language that keeps passengers comfortable. It's information control in the service of safety, and it works remarkably well. So, the next time you're at 35,000 feet and everything seems routine, remember that routine is constructed. It's maintained through constant vigilance, professional training, and yes, secret codes that let the crew manage whatever situations arise without disturbing your sense of calm. Those flight attendants walking the aisles with smiles are simultaneously monitoring dozens of variables, ready to deploy their coded language the instant something requires coordination. You might never hear an emergency code on any of your flights, which means the system is working exactly as designed. But now you know it's there, operating silently, keeping you safe in a language you were never meant to understand.